This week on the Redeemed Marriage podcast, we're going to be doing a little bit of a follow-up from last week's episode, and we're going to talk a little bit about just moving beyond the hurt, and specifically as it relates to our physical relationship. But there's going to be also some good discussion in here just about moving on from the hurt in your marriage. So stay tuned. Hello, folks. Welcome back to another episode of the Redeemed Marriage Podcast. We are Rusty and Heather Bryant, and glad to be back with you for another marriage topic. And hey, we know we keep promising this whole rebrand thing.
It's coming.
And my goodness, we're just waiting on our people, our people to do their thing. And also, because we got to get new pictures, new photos. That's
doing
happening
that tomorrow.
Yep, so that'll be going on this week. So hopefully, really soon, we're going to be able to roll out some things. And when we roll out this new look with the new logo and things like that, we're going to also really start publicizing more, I guess, some of the other marriage resources that we offer. Particularly be on the lookout for more information about our marriage coaching, and we're going to have a special offer that's going to go out with our rebrand, so we're really excited about that. And if you've never really inquired about our marriage coaching and you want to do that and kind of get ahead of the game, because I do feel like with the marriage coaching that we're currently doing, plus when we offer this sort of this intro special, whatever, with this new branding, we might fill up pretty fast. So if you're interested in kind of getting a head start on that, reach out to us through social media or our contact form on our website, theredeemedmarriage.com, and we'll get you some information, and maybe you can kind of get ahead of the game. So this week, we are going to do a little bit of a follow-up on last week's episode. This was not part of the plan, but we did last week. I don't remember. Oh, bedroom thoughts.
Yeah.
But we were specifically trying to talk about just the healing of a relationship, the physical intimacy, and just sort of some practical tips, I guess, that you could say for when you're trying to reestablish physical intimacy, especially after betrayal. And we gave a resource that we were really trying to push last week and gave some insight into that. But we sort of felt like we might have left some things unsaid based on what some listeners said. So we had some comments. Listeners were really enjoyed the episode, appreciated it. But a lot of them said, well, we didn't really hear my side of it.
Yeah. And
how I was able to move beyond the hurt. And so you may be listening to this and this is not your story, but I do think that there's something to be said for just, your mindset when there's pain in your marriage, whether it has to do with a betrayal or, infidelity, pornography, just some sort of indiscretion, I guess you could say. But then also, how do you, just in everyday pain, and when, how do you get in the right mindset to move beyond that and to kind of reestablish the physical intimacy? So that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, because if we only had physical intimacy when things were perfect, then that wouldn't happen very often, because things in life just don't go perfect and as planned all the time. And so even if there's, if you're frustrated with your spouse, or if their coughing is getting on your nerve.
Come on. I mean, just.
Y'all, and I don't even know if y'all heard that, because our new soundboard may have hidden that well, but he cannot quit coughing. We just got back from vacation, and I was like, there were times that I was like, oh, my word.
Well, what's going to happen? One day you're going to come on here and you're going to be all by yourself. You're going to be, he died.
That's so morbid. That's so rude. That's not going to happen.
Well,
because I'm going to tell you, if you die, I ain't doing this by myself.
Wouldn't be a very good podcast, would it, if it was just one of us?
That's right. That's right.
All right. Well, you keep talking. I'm going to get a sip of water real quick.
But yeah, so we really were fascinated by some of the comments and questions that we got. And when we went back and listened to it, it was a lot of kind of how I was able to move on and what the expectation was in physical intimacy for me. And in reality, I think a lot of people who listen to this have more of your side of the story. And how do you move past the pain of when your spouse has been unfaithful?
Yep. So I think what we'll do is just sort of kind of talk through how I was able to sort of move beyond the hurt. And, we talk a lot about this just in general in our on our podcast, just about moving beyond the pain and beyond the hurt. But just kind of specifically to tie it back into last week, I think we just need to sort of, wrap it up and with more of my perspective. And one of the things that I just wanted to say from the very beginning is everybody has a different story. Like I know that people that listen to this, I would say 95% of them, they can really appreciate what we're sharing and understand that it's our story.
True.
But so many people get their not so many people, 5% there. That's what I'm get their feelings hurt because they can't agree with our story.
Right.
And we get it. That's fine, but it's still our story. And so that's the best that we can offer to you, is to say, this is how it worked for us. And if you want hope to look at where we are now, then you can go, okay, well, maybe we should think through what they're saying, because coming out on the other side of it, look where they are now. So that's all we're trying to do. Now, along the way, we also have gained enough experience and maturity from dealing with other couples and other situations where we are able to offer some insight. But the majority of this is because it's our story. And so we want to acknowledge that there's a lot of different situations out there. And even the fact that I'm not a female is probably a very big deal when it comes to moving past the pain and the hurt. Now, not saying that it's less painful for a male. It's just different. In fact, we had someone send in a question, and I think it was actually on our survey. It was a male, and they said that they wanted us to address the topic of why it hurts so much more for a male when the female has had an affair. Well, the way I see it, if you've been betrayed, you're going to say that it hurts worse.
That's right.
I mean, that's just natural. So I can't say to you, oh, it's worse, if you're a husband, if you're the male and get betrayed by your spouse, or vice versa. I don't know. Same with excuse me. Same with the physical part of it. Like, I feel like that for most males, because it is such a big need for us, that I feel like probably we can move a little faster in that area. I can't even imagine what a female would feel like, but it's so different, because like for a female, if they've been betrayed and their husband has had an affair, I can just imagine them always going, I wasn't good enough. I'm not pretty enough. My body's not like this person's body. I didn't please them all of that kind of stuff. But for a male, then there's this whole pride and just, rejection and disrespect. And then, there is an element of I wasn't good enough, So I get that. So I want to acknowledge the fact that I am a male, and that's all that I can speak, can speak for. But I do know that even though I am a male, and the physical part of the relationship, it is, in our case, usually one spouse or the other has a higher sex drive. I mean, it's definitely me in our relationship. And so, but even with that, regaining the trust and the ability to have the physical intimacy, just moving beyond the pain of that, was extremely difficult for me. So people need to hear that. Like, you need to hear that, in pain, when you've been through hurt and pain, that it's very, very normal to have this, this resistance to physical intimacy, even though it's a need and a want and a desire that God made you as part of your body. There's just so much mental that goes into trying to get back to a point where you can be intimate that way. And so, first of all, I would just say to you, recognize that it's a process, and recognize that that it's okay, that it takes some time, and it takes some steps in order to get back to that point.
Yeah. And, when I think about your side of the story of how, just thinking back to our trying to become intimate, it didn't happen one time. Like, there were several times that we would start the process. And I mean, it started with hand holding, and then, and that's a physical act, just holding hands. And then, and there were times that we would try to be intimate, and it was like, this just isn't going to happen. It hurt too bad. And I would say, like, what is it that's hurting you right now? And just talking through that. What are some of the, if you don't mind me asking, what are some of the things that you think kept you from being intimate right away?
That's the thing that I hope that the person, if you are the betrayer, and you're listening to this, and you're frustrated maybe because your spouse is not coming around yet to this area, I want you to know that the mental images are crippling. And the because so much of it, not so much of it, 100% of it is our imagination, because we have no idea really what happened. And the unknown is so consuming and just painful, to not know, but trying to put the pieces together. And especially early on, after you find out about a betrayal, and you're just constantly thinking about, when, where, why, all of that, and you're trying to make sense of it. And then the very thing that broke the trust and became the betrayal, as far as, crossing the line physically, when you try to do that again with your spouse, all of those images and the imagination, everything just comes flooding back, and you can't help but think, what was going on? Like, this was supposed to be, for us and reserved just for us. And, to get your mind and your heart back into a place where you can truly forgive and wipe that slate, have a clean slate there, it is a very difficult process to get to.
Right. I think also that for us, and again, you've said this, like, because as the female, I was the one that was unfaithful. We might have lots of listeners where the male was unfaithful. And so it may seem different, for the wife to try to process through this. But for me, and we've had this discussion so many times, is the affair was never about the sexual act. And that's not the case for some people, some of our listeners, like especially, for the male, it may be that it was all about the sexual act. Whereas for me, it was more about feeling needed and wanted. And so for me, I didn't have much to deal with sexually because it never was about that for me. But you, on the other hand, had a lot to deal with sexually when we tried to be intimate again.
Yeah, I mean, that was, for me, that was the number one thing.
That's right.
And having to, get beyond that. And I think that where people get hung up so many times, the betrayed, is trying to make sense of it. And let me just say, you will go to your grave probably trying to make sense of it. Now, if you're in a relationship where both of you have committed, an affair, both have had an affair. I mean, because there's plenty of relationships that's
Sure.
happened. So yeah, you can make a little more sense of it,
Physical or emotional.
right? But I still think that you're never going to make, even to the point where if I came to you tomorrow and said that I've had an affair, even though you have had an affair, I don't think you could fully understand why you would be going, how did you do, why in the world?
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And even though I can now, because even when I try to tell my story, I'm like, how did I get there? And so it doesn't make sense. It's not supposed to make sense. It doesn't make sense because it was sin. And I was living in a world that was not real. It was just, a lot of sin and just thinking, trying to explain it, like I wasn't thinking rationally. That's the word I was looking for. So if you can't explain it, then it's hard to turn around and try to understand it as well. So yeah, if you came to me and said the same thing, I'm like, how did you get there?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make sense.
But I think that's where a lot of betrayed people, they get hung up because they're just thinking, okay, when I can make sense of this
Right.
and understand
not
it,
gonna happen.
then we'll be able to move and take that next step forward.
That's right.
And so you really do have to just sort of get to this point where you just say, I can't understand this, and I'm never going to fully understand it, which means that at some point you stop dwelling and harping on the questions and asking the questions of your spouse. Now, there's a time for that, and we've talked about that before. But when it comes to even the physical relationship, there's so many questions, and that's the whole point of what I'm saying. You're never going to get all the answers. So when you start to be intimate with your spouse and you start having these questions about, well, what did you do with this person? And, why did you do it? But how did it feel? And where were you? And, you're thinking all of these things, and that's what's stopping you from being intimate with your spouse. You can't take that next step. And so I'll just share a couple of things that really held me back. And even now, people say, well, it's been 12 years. There's still things that are painful that I have to continue to work through, even 12 years later. And like for instance, when you said it again this time. You even said last week you were referring to kind of how you feel, how we all change and our physical intimacy and what the things that we desire. And yeah, that's absolutely true. But there's also this part of me that goes, okay, well, you are different from when, before the affair. And so I sometimes start thinking, well, is it because of the affair? So if it's a change that maybe I don't, that I wish it was like it was before, then I question and I go, well, that's not my fault. Why are you different? You're different because of something that you did. So I'm just saying, these are the fleshly, the enemy that talks to you and tells you, why it's never going to work. And so that's one of the things that I excuse me. That's one of the things that I continue to have to deal with from time to time because I think to myself, like you mentioned, you said, that you don't necessarily the excitement part of it. You're more of you want to feel loved and even when we're intimate. And then I'm like, well, yeah, but you used to like more of the excitement. And so then I go, was because of what happened? Like, because if it is, and that's something that I really like, then that's not fair to me, And so I have to learn how to not blame everything on, not see everything through the lens of an affair. I have to see, what is it that God is doing in our relationship right now? And how is he changing us and changing our hearts? And, so I think, one of the big things is just grace. It is just recognizing that, this is a massive sin that happened in our relationship. And it's something that you have completely, completely repented of, completely changed your life and your heart. And so you are a new person. And, some of the new person may come along with some changes and some differences. And so, like, I celebrate that. Like I want to be a part of those changes. And so instead of getting stuck in a place where I'm like thinking about what happened or trying to figure out why it happened, instead I'm rejoicing and thankful that you're not who you were. And so our marriage is not what it was.
Right, right. One of the things that I just keep thinking about while you're talking is this is 100% a battle of the mind. Like when you start thinking, when you're trying to be intimate with your spouse, whether you were the betrayed or the betrayer, you have a choice in what you're thinking about. And, the enemy's probably trying to put things in your mind and you're trying to have the right mindset going in and you battle. And I just cannot help but think of the scripture that literally changed my life when it came to the process of thinking and going to battle with things that were going on in my mind. And so I want to read 2 Corinthians 10, 3-5. And if you've never heard this, or if you've heard me say it 15 times, you need to write this down, whether you're the betrayed, the betrayer, or if you're neither and you're just going daily life into relationship with your spouse. It says, "For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world, but on the contrary, they have divine power to demolish stronghold. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ." And what you're describing and what I talked about last week is a stronghold. It is 100% the enemy wanting to get a foot in the door into our marriage and into this very intimate part that God designed for a husband and wife. And we can continue to try to move past it or forget it, and that's not going to happen. And so we have to make sure that when those thoughts come in our mind and we're battling and we're feeling down, or if the enemy is like, yeah, but you're not good enough, those thoughts, we have to take those thoughts captive, and not just take them captive and say, okay, I'm not going to think about that, but it says to take it captive and make it obedient to Christ. So reminding yourself who you are in Christ, reminding yourself that who he created you to be and what the design of marriage is, and trying to remember that God created sex and intimacy, and He wants that. He wants just as much as you do for that to be a fresh and new place, and a place that you can begin again in.
So, a couple of things real quick that I want to make sure that I point out before we run out of time. So, I do think that I remember your mentor talking to me at one point and saying that the person that's betrayed, they get this in their brain, this picture and this image, and it's more like a movie, and you see affairs and you see, the betrayal and stuff on movies, and it just all seems so exciting and passionate and all this. And she said, don't put that in your mind, because most of the time it's not like that. And so what we have to, I think, as the betrayed, what we think sometimes is, when we were newlyweds and we first got married, it was, you can't keep your hands off each other. And it was just always, so much fun and excitement. And what we think happened after we've been betrayed, we think, well, yeah, you missed that, so you went and found somebody else to do that with. And then when it comes back, well, you're back to, for us, it was 15 years. So it was, well, we're just back to 15 years of marriage. And everybody's physical life and physical intimacy changes, and it swings different ways throughout the years. And so, again, it's the whole, you can't look and blame and point your finger at that. And instead, you have to realize we're just on this marriage journey. And as we change, we talk about the change, we embrace the change, we celebrate the change, but it's also one of those things where if there's something that's if you're the betrayed and you feel like there's something missing, and you're even trying to blame it on, well, we don't do this anymore. We don't have this spark or this connection anymore because of this. Well, then talk to your spouse about it and find out, why has this changed? And it's just communication, but it's also, again, it's just grace. It's like just don't keep hanging this over their head forever, because if you don't move past it, then you're never going to experience the physical relationship that God intended you to have. The only thing that I can think the best way to kind of a word picture is just an athlete. Like when an athlete is playing the sport that they love and they get injured playing the sport that they love, well, then they go through this rehabilitation process where they have to strengthen it and get to a point where they can actually get back on the field again. And they have a choice. They can either just say, well, I'm hanging it up. I'm not ever going to do that again, because if I do, I'm just going to get hurt again. Or mentally, they can get to a point where they're like, I'm not going to play again because playing is what got me hurt, and I don't want to get hurt again, so I'm just not going to ever play again. But that's not what real athletes do. They rehabilitate, they work hard, and they get back out there. And the first few times, I can guarantee you, because I've been in this position, they have in the back of their mind, there's this fear. They don't want to get hurt again doing that. But if they don't ever do it, they never experience the joy of doing the thing that they love. And I just feel like that so much of that is, I know it's a completely different thing. I get it. But if you think about your betrayal and being in, your physical intimacy like that, where it's just at some point you've got to stop rehabbing and actually get out there and take the step, because that's the only way that you'll get back to experience the joy that was created for you to have. And if you don't ever get back in the game, you're never going to experience that. So I just think that, I know it's a very, very complex thing, but so much of it is just giving your spouse grace and getting to a point where you're like, I'm not going to hold this over their head for for the rest of our lives. And I know that there's people out there that think, I've just got a get out of jail free card for every situation of our life from now on. That's not the way to live. The way to live is, like I said, to embrace what God's doing in your life, in your spouse's life, in your marriage. You know, start taking those thoughts captive, remove them when they start coming in, replace them with this thought of, you know, God, it hurts to think about it, but instead I'm going to say, thank you, God, that we're not there anymore, that we're here. And then you take those steps forward and you keep moving forward until you create this new foundation that's so much better than what it was before.
It's a good word.
All right.
Preach.
Can we end it right there?
Absolutely.
Again, my apologies for having to cough from time to time. I am trying the best that I can. All right. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.